Hello everybody. Today we're going to be talking about Bulleit Bourbon Frontier Whiskey. So today's a bit of a special episode, as usually I don't have all of the offerings of a specific brand before I go to do my review. Now as you can see, I've tried all three of these, and they're pretty good. So other than being annoying to spell, Bulleit whiskey has a bit of a history behind it. There was a guy named Augustus Bulleit back in the 1830s who was an innkeeper. Now he ran an inn for a few years, and unfortunately the business didn't work out. And afterwards he became a miller. Now back then millers would get paid about 5 to 7% of what they milled in that particular grain. Now a lot of these guys would go and use that feed, use it as feed for livestock. Some others would make whiskey out of it. Augustus was one of those guys. Now whiskey was way easier to sell. So over a few years he refined his recipe, settled on a 2/3 rye, 1/3 corn mash bill. Now by today's standards that would be considered a rye. However, back then, they just called it a bourbon. So he sold his whiskey for a couple of decades. Was doing pretty well, and there's stories of people going out into the frontier, bringing an axe, their family, and a barrel of bourbon. And Bulleit was one of those bourbons that they would bring. So in 1860, Augustus got on a flatboat down to New Orleans to sell some of his whiskey. Now, unfortunately, the boat disappeared, and so did Augustus. So nobody really knows when he died or what exactly happened. However, the recipe then lay dormant for about 120 years, until in 1987, his great-great-grandson, Tom Bulleit, picked up the torch and decided to try his hand at distilling. Now, he was a lawyer, so he stopped being a lawyer to become a distiller. Bit of a brave move, but I guess he needed to feel a little bit more fulfilled. Anyway, so in 1999 he released his original Bulleit bourbon here, and he's been making this ever since. This is 68% corn, 28% rye, and 4% barley. Now you'll notice if you've got a bottle of this that rye really makes a big difference. This is unlike a lot of other bourbons that you'll try. So why don't you go ahead and pour yourself a glass, and we'll do as we usually do. So something worth noting is the bottle itself. It's pretty cool. It's got a nice shape to it. It's got raised lettering here, which you don't see on a ton of bottles. Usually it's just kind of a label or whatever. But speaking of the label, something that you'll note, this is one of the bottles that they sell in the US, that's where I live. And the label itself is a bit askew. Now, in the bottles that they sell outside of the US, the UK and Australia, I think is where this is mostly sold, the label is perfectly horizontal. It's a little tidbit. So, you're giving that a couple seconds to breathe here. Go ahead and have a smell, and we'll talk about it. So, all right. So typically with bourbons, what you're going to get, this is very similar. However, there's a little bit more. I smell some orange and the usual oak. I also get a hint of leather, which I believe is more due to the rye content as well. Yeah, there's definitely some orange in there. So if you smell anything else other than that, definitely put it in the comments. I'd like to know. All right, so why don't we go ahead and do a tasting, and cheers. So one of the coolest things about this, I think, is unlike a lot of bourbons, even though it's got a lot of corn in it, it's not quite as sweet as a lot of them. So the rye is really one of the major players here. You've got a bit of spice to it, and that's what you're probably tasting. Something that is a little bit different here too is, even though the color, it's got a decent amber color to it, but it is a little thin looking. But you'll probably notice the texture. It's got some body to it. It's almost like It's like thicker, like almost like it's not like a syrup, but almost like if you watered down a syrup. Definitely thicker than a lot of the other bourbons I've talked about on this channel. So moving on from this, I'm going to talk about the 10-year over here. It's a limited release, and next time I will be doing a review of this. So please join me in about a week and I'll have the video up for you. Until then, please like and subscribe to the channel, and I look forward to doing more of these videos for you. See ya.